The BBC website. It has always been a prodigious example of what a quality website should look like ever since the days of Web 1.0. If you were ever in need of inspiration but found yourself overwhelmed by the influx of throwaway websites, then you always knew that you could rely on the classic BBC website for an ideal benchmark of how a streamlined but also substantial website should look and feel. Even after decades of internet commercialization and with Web 3.0 on the horizon, things are still the same as they were before. Excluding search engines, this website here is the most visited website in the British Isles. License fee pay or not, Britons definitely know a good website when they see one. What makes this website so good is that it exudes professionalism without ever feeling pretentious. They never tried to be avant-garde, there are no crazy animations or gaudy colours to be found here. In fact, the adverse is true. They opt for a placid grey colour scheme paired with a nondescript sans serif font. These are not the choices web designers make if they want their website to command attention from their users. But the BBC manages to do this anyway, all the while remaining humble and not feeling ostentatious. It is not the prima facie that makes this website such craftsmanship. It is the layouts, the nooks and crannies, the way that the website dynamically transforms itself from one size into the other without ever missing a beat. On the surface it looks basic, almost cheaply made perhaps. These assumptions are immediately corrected the minute that you start to work your way around it though. That is where its true power comes from. The importance of this website cannot be understated. That is why, by the end of the tutorial, you'll be able to create a mock version of the BBC website. Obviously we won't be creating a whole thing. We are only creating the small section that you can currently see being displayed. Nevertheless, we are creating the most important section. That is the content that is the first thing users see when they load up the home page. The opening section consists of what you can see here. The headline news story accompanied by two sideline stories. In addition, we also create the navbar, since that is such an iconic aspect of the website. We're going to get stuck in here. Nothing is truncated for the sake of simplicity. Things work responsibly, just like how they do on the actual website. Please note that this is not the work of some CSS framework. Everything done here will be made with plain HTML, CSS and JavaScript. The purpose of this tutorial is to keep things as pure as possible, so that things are not enmeshed in the jargon of one specific technology. Instead, you can just see things for how they are, then easily be able to adapt it into your specific technology of choice. You should have no problem following along with this tutorial if you do decide to use a framework like React or Angular, etc. Which, by the way, would definitely be the preferred method if you were to make a fully fledged website that was akin to a content-heavy news website like the BBC website. If you didn't, then your code would soon turn into fettuccine. Since we are only making a small section though, there is no need for us to use such frameworks. I was just giving you a word of warning just in case you plan on going further than the scope of this tutorial. Finally, I will post a link to the completed project's CodePen page for you to reference if you get stuck at any point throughout this tutorial. Here we are in an empty project folder, inside my text editor of choice, VS Code by Microsoft. Here is the markup file. This will contain all of our project's HTML code. In VS Code, we can simply type in an exclamation mark, then press enter on that to generate the HTML boilerplate code automatically. Our project will make use of an icon pack called Font Awesome. It will save us from having to draw the vector graphics ourselves. To get access to it, we'll go to the official website. We'll just type in Font Awesome. And then we'll need to log into our account. And then you can click on Font Awesome CDN. And then you copy it from here. And then we're going to paste it in the head like so. We'll also change the title whilst we're at it as well. Now the styling for this project is going to be pretty involved. We will give the styling its own dedicated folder. Inside we will create two style sheets, one for the main website, the other for just the navbar. So here we've created them. And then we link to both of them also in the head. Now the navbar comes at the top of the website, therefore it is only natural that we start by creating the navbar first. This asterisk selector selects all elements in the markup file. Inside we're going to declare some styling that we want all elements to follow by default. So we make it so no elements will have either margin or padding by default. They will also have these margin and padding values included in the final width and height values. Apart from that, we will also set the default font family, font size and font weight. So the background color can be grey instead of white. As you can imagine, the nav elements will contain our navbar. So here is our navbar here. As you can see, it's got a background color of white to contrast with the greyish background color of the document. It's got a border, but it's only on the bottom because that's the only side that isn't immediately met with the edge of the viewport. It's got overflow hidden, so content that's larger than the navbar itself will be hidden. It's display flex, which is useful for dynamic websites, which obviously this website will be heavily dynamic, and it aligns a center on both the X and Y axis respectively. Here's an image of the BBC logo that I just found from the internet. As you can see though, if you go on our document, I'll just open it with Live Server, which is a VS Code extension. As you can see, it's far too big, and because it's overflow hidden, we can't even see it. We want users to be able to click on the image. So as a container, we will use a link tag. Notice its ID attribute. This is what we will be targeting to give this specific link tag unique styling. Of course, this is just a dummy website though. We don't actually want to go anywhere when the user clicks on a link. Therefore, we pass this in as the value of the element's href attribute. So nothing happens when the link does get pressed because it just returns null. All link elements inside of the nav will be flexbox in and of themselves. It is also important that they are positioned relatively. This is because we want to be able to position elements absolute in relation to this parent div, and you'll see more on why you want this later on. As for this specific link element, and not just any link element inside of the nav element, this is the styling that it will have. To decrease the size of the image, but also ensure that its size is still proportional to its dimensions, we set the height to be auto, meaning that the compiler will decide its height based on whatever value its width is and the image's dimensions. So now if we test this out, as you can see, it's centered in the middle, but yeah, it's got the border on the right, which is good because they're all going to have borders on the right, which is how we get the finished result. And it's sized correctly. Yeah, this is looking good. If you're wondering why it's centered in the middle, it's because justify content center, which is horizontal axis, because display flex is display row by default, and align items to center, well, that will be vertical, because again it's display row by default. Now the next item will have some text, and link elements actually mess with the default styling of text because it turns it to blue, and it also adds an underline, and we want to remove this, so we'll just add some styling underneath. And this next link element is the sign-in. Notice that we have given an ID to both the child div and the parent A tag. We did this because we will soon be adding in another div as a child of this link tag. It will represent the underline that appears when the user hovers over the associated entry in the navbar. We have offset the text on the left, making it move towards the right. This is to make room for the vector user icon that we will soon be adding from Font Awesome. So here it is here, and this class is used on every icon which is from Font Awesome, but then this class will actually get the specific avatar icon that we need from Font Awesome. And we'll add some padding right to that. Furthermore, we'll change the default size of these icons. And now as you can see, it's looking good, but the problem with this is if you actually go on the BBC website or just the finished product, as you can see, this underline appears and they're different colors. But essentially when we hover over these text here, we want an underline to appear, and obviously we haven't done this yet, so. Okay, and here it is here. And as you can see, it's position absolute. This is what we mentioned earlier about these A tags being position relative, because this is position absolute in relation to the bottom of the relative container, and it also takes up 100% of the width, and it's got some height to it. And we'll change this background color later on because obviously they won't be red, they have varied colors, but I just added it now just to give you a demonstration. And obviously we'll need to add this to as a child of the A tag in the markup. And so now, as you can see, this is what it looks like, and as you can see, it's looking good. Now all these classes represent the different colors that we'll be using for the underline. Again, if you're having a hard time to see this, actually no, just don't copy this word for word, just literally just go to the code pen and get it from there, because there's literally no point in you hard coding all this in yourself, because that would just take way too long. And besides, you don't really have to use these colors anyway. I mean, it's just for demonstration, but I guess the colors don't really matter. So when we are hovering over a link, the child nav line inside of that link that we are currently hovering over will be changed from display none to display block, meaning that we can actually see it. But obviously for this to work, we'll need to make this display none by default. And we'll remove the background color whilst we're at it as well. And instead we'll use the nav blue class, the color class that we just created here. And so now we hover over, and as you can see, we could, it appears, and this is good. And what comes next after the sign in is a singular bell icon with no accompanying text. So all we've done is just added this font awesome icon here, and obviously the relevant underline. This one's nav dark blue. And we'll give it the styling. So if you go on it, again, looking good. But if you go on the real BBC website, after this bell comes the main bulk of the single strip navbar. That is this section that starts with home and ends at CBeebies. And there's also this more, and we can click on it to expand this drop down. Now at first this looks like a pretty simple design. What makes it complex is how, if I can show you, so basically you get to a certain level and then it resizes itself dynamically. As you can see, unlike these, look, the width of these isn't changing. Only the width of this section here. See, look, it's changing just every inch that we move it. Now the width of these, they just sort of jump. See, look at that. It just jumps into place. But it's not the case for these because they're just constantly resizing itself. And this is what makes it slightly more complicated than the rest of the navbar. Due to its unique properties, this part of the navbar will have its own dedicated section element. And here's the styling for that. Again, this will be flex. I know that flex is used a lot already. That is because it is invaluable when creating responsive designs, like the one that the BBC currently uses. All of the entries in this main nav section will have the same class applied to them, and that's this class here. That is because they are supposed to be equally spaced out between each other in their own subsection, so they can all afford to share the same class. Here is the first entry in this navbar subsection. As you can see, it has that main nav entry class applied to it. As well, it also has its own ID. Although we won't be styling the ID, it is needed because of what we will be doing later, where we will be moving entities from the navbar into the expanded dropdown to make room in a shrunken navbar. I'll now be making the other entries in this navbar subsection when the navbar is fully expanded. Please remember that each entry should have different IDs, and the color of the underlines vary based on the color classes that we have created beforehand. So here they are, they've all been created. Again, if you're struggling to read this, then don't worry. I mean, they're not too different from each other. The only real, this one has got an icon pointing downwards. The more, if you can go, yeah, so here it is here. Again, CodePen, it saves you from having to write all of this out yourself. But again, it's not really too difficult. Again, they've all got different IDs. What we will do though is we'll just give this arrow some margin left so it's spaced out a bit. It's looking good. Now the final item in the navbar is the search option. That comes with a magnifying glass icon that we can get from Font Awesome. So below this section here, and here's the markup for that. Again, not too interesting. And here's the styling for that. Now obviously it's not responsive, but we're going to add some media queries to make it responsive. And if you don't know what media queries are, they allow you to write code that only appears when specific circumstances are met. In our case, that will be when the width of the document is below a certain width. Then apply this styling when that is the case. Now the first change that needs to happen in this media query here is that the width of every entry inside of the navbar subsection will start to be affected by the viewport's width, instead of before when their width remains static and only the positions moved when we decrease the size of the viewport. To achieve this effect, we make every entry have a flex grow of 1 instead of padding like what they had before. This will evenly distribute the free space out in the flexbox equally between all members of the flexbox. Therefore, if the flexbox gets smaller because of the viewport's width being shrunk, then each item will also become slimmer accordingly. And so now you can tell when we've met it because, again, look. Obviously it doesn't shrink further than that because it can't really, because the text is blocking it from shrinking any further. But you could tell that, yeah, a significant change has already been made just from that. When we get to a certain width, the navbar shrinks drastically and some entries start to disappear from the navbar subsection, and that's the CBBs and CBBC. Again, I know I didn't put too much focus on these, but these IDs do exist in the markup file. Again, you can view on the code pen, see for yourself. And so if we look at this, as you can see, they actually disappear. So you look, CBBC, and then it's gone. So that's the desired effect there. At this stage, we re-establish some of the navbar's width, remove another entry in the subsection, and remove the text from the sign-in entry on the navbar, leaving just an avatar icon in its place. And again, all we're doing here is just we're removing more entries when these conditions are met. So iPlayer will only be visible on screen widths greater than 870 pixels. If we're on a screen width that's less than 871, then it simply just won't be visible. The last few media queries have been pretty uneventful. When we get to this mark though, we are going to make some pretty drastic changes. That is because by this point, it is assumed that we are dealing with mobile viewers. We will therefore need to make some core styling changes to things like the font size and the actual height of the navbar. We also make the weather entry visible now again for the same reason. So as you can see, we've done just that. We've changed some of the font size, and also we shrunk the nav height and the icon height, and we've also decreased the BBC image size, and we actually don't need that to be fair because we already have it above. And main nav sports, this comes back into view now for some reason. And again, if you are questioning this, then yeah, this does actually happen on the BBC website, but don't worry because it will soon disappear again when we write the next media query. As you can see, it's gone now again. And yeah, it was display flex because that's what it was originally, so it doesn't really matter what display it is, it will be visible as long as it's not display none. And news is the last thing that we remove. And so now if we check this out, we refresh anyway, as you can see, look at that. I mean, look, it's actually, see, look, it changes. This is exactly how it is on the actual BBC website, and even that jumps there as well. See, look at that jump there. Again, what I've recreated that jump. Obviously, you know, it's not exactly the same. It's not spot the difference. You probably will be able to find some minute differences. But essentially, you know, I mean, look at that. And obviously what we need to do now is when they click on the drop down, we need to be able to actually show the drop down. So we'll go back to our markup. Everything related to the extra drop down that opens up when the user clicks on the More tab will be contained within this section. The actual content of the drop down will not be contained in this div though. Again, this one's display flex, just as expected. Everything's centered horizontally on the x-axis, and it's got a border bottom. It doesn't have a border top because the navbar itself has a border bottom. Therefore, if this had a border top, then we would have two borders making a collision with each other, which isn't good. We just want border bottom only. Now, the actual content of the drop down will not be contained within this div. Instead, it will be contained within a div that is a child of this more nav div. That is because we are going to use CSS grids to position everything correctly, and CSS grids will make dynamic positioning extremely easy. So at the moment, we have 6 columns of equal proportion. That's what this repeat function does. There is a 10 pixels gap between each row and column respectively, and content will also be aligned in the center of the vertical axis. Each item within this dropdown will be represented as a link. Here is the styling for each item in the dropdown then, because we're targeting the links. As you can see, the background of the link will be changed when we are hovering over it. That's what this pseudo class is here, hover. And we need to create that div here with the more nav content that we've literally just finished styling. Now here's all the data that needs to go into the dropdown in one go. It is very important that they are in this order. The data that we want displayed to drop down on its full viewport width are the links at the very bottom, starting with food and ending at 3. So if I show you very quickly on the BBC website, so on full width, those are the actual only ones that they show, but only when we shrink it, you can actually see the other ones. To hide all of the others, we use this nth child selector. What we are doing is selecting the 8th link child inside of the more nav content element. This is the reason for the number 8. -n is there to say that we want to select all child elements before the child element that we specified with the number after, so that's the number 8 in our case. Therefore, all child links will be hidden before the link that says food. which is the 8th link tag child of more nav content. And so now, as you can see, these are the only ones that we can see. Now, resizing the content of the drop downs is actually quite hard, because when we get to here, we encounter a situation with flex grow where the navbar doesn't really have a set width, because a lot of the entries or the width is determined is by flex grow and not a quantitative value really. The solution to this is to use the calc method to get the cumulative width of all the navbar items that are not a part of the navbar subsection, and add this to the width of the navbar subsection, which should be a percentage. As you can see, 63 is matching. Now, 445 pixels is a number that I've already calculated beforehand for the navbar items that are not a part of the subsection. And yeah, you're welcome, because I calculated it out beforehand using inspect elements, just highlighting over the elements and then adding up the width. Here we are splitting things up a bit, and quite literally too. We are spacing out our container over 2 rows now, which is the reason for this extra property. And we're also adding another column. In addition, we are unhiding the first link element child before the H child. This will give us another link to which we can fill out our grid with. And again, we're just changing things up a bit so it looks nice. And also unhiding the next entry along. And again, we're just going down the list. Again, there's not really too much to say about this. Now finally, we will add one extra media query, and it will leave us with 2 equally spaced out columns. We also need to add an X to the drop down. The user will be able to click on it to close the drop down. So now we'll test this out. As you can see, it's looking good. It won't look perfect at the moment, because what we're doing, we actually factored into account the X, which this X here, and we're currently not showing this at the moment. So we need to add this. We set the more nav content div to be position relative all that time ago, so that this cross icon could be position absolute and position itself to top right corner of the content div. Okay, and so now, as you could see, it's there, and now everything's looking as it should. I mean, this is looking exactly how it should, and you know, this is all good. But looking good isn't good enough. We also need to be able to actually open and close the drop down, and we need a way of doing this. And since CSS can't handle on-click listeners, we need to now go onto the JavaScript file. First though, we will hide the drop downs that we can't see it unless we click on more to open it up. So we'll just say display none, and it's gone. And we include the script element at the very bottom of the body, so that all of the markup that this file needs is loaded up before the file itself. And then we'll create the script file. And we'll create references to the elements that we need. This boolean will determine whether or not the dropdown is currently visible to the user or not. One of the ways of either opening or closing the dropdown, depending on which state it is in before the user triggered the event listener, is if the user clicked on the more option, the one with the arrow pointing downwards, and that's why we've added a click event listener to this more button. We assign the boolean with the reverse of whatever its current value is. So if it's true, then we display the dropdown. If it isn't, then we don't. And we say get elements by class name. Well, there's only one element with that class name, but it returns an array, and so we just get the single element that's returned from this array, and then we set its style. So either block to show it or none to hide it. And we search through more btn, so we want only the nav line that's actually inside of the more btn, and obviously there's only one, which is the reason why it works. We'll also close the dropdown when the user clicks on the arrow icon. This will only close the dropdown though, as it won't even be visible when the dropdown is hidden, because it is a part of the dropdown itself. And so now if we test this out, we click on more, and either we click on X, or, so I'll show you, we click on more again. As you can see, it's gone. Right, we are now finished with the navbar. It is now time to finish up with this tutorial and move on to doing the headline news cards. First though, we need to create some styling that will align our entire website to the dimensions defined by the navbar, and we'll do this in the main.css file. The first class will act as a row of our web page, and if you look at the real BBC website, it is divided up into different sections which are derived from rows. And the second class will make sure that the row's width is aligned with the width of the navbar, because it would look weird if they were out of sync. Besides, this is the way that it is done on the actual BBC website, and as you can see currently, its width, 1330 pixels, is the same as the default width of the drop down here, and we're just going to follow the same rules essentially to do the width of this center content. As you can see, we're doing exactly what we did with the drop down, exactly the same thing. This out of the way, we will begin with creating the welcoming text. As you can see, it too uses the center content class to center the text in alignment with the navbar, and it uses it there. As you can see, it too uses the center content class to center the text in alignment with the navbar. And here's the styling for this. And if you go back, as you can see, it's looking how we want it to, in the sense that it's aligned with the actual navbar, so as you can see the text is. And you will decrease the font size when you get to the mobile view. Okay, now we can actually start doing the cards. This will be the section where we display the headline news cards. We want it slightly offset from the bottom of the welcoming text, which is why we add this inline styling here. And as you can see, it also has center content, but it also has this class, which we'll style now. These cards will be positioned in a grid. This will make it easy for us to reposition the cards dynamically. The individual cards will be manifested through link elements, so that we can click on them even though they won't take us to anywhere, because this is a dummy website. And here is the styling for these link elements. Now, the greater sign is only there to target the link elements that are direct children of the opening cards class. Now here's the markup for the different cards. Pretty formulaic, and you can pause the video and see what it looks like. But remember, if you're struggling, there's always the CodePen project in the description box below. But essentially we've got the links here, and only the first one's got a class on it because it needs to be larger than the other ones. And then inside we've got card image container, and then image, and then a paragraph, and then it's the end of the link tag. And it's the same for the other ones as well. Again, these don't have class on the link tags because they are subsidiary. But these images, again, they're just from the internet, and obviously, again, the CodePen page, if you don't know where they're from. But essentially, we'll do the styling now. Now remember, only the first link child had a class assigned to it, and that's the first card, because we want to make it bigger than the other cards, as it is the main news headliner. So here at the moment, we've got 4 columns, which means the lines go from 1 to 5. 1 being the column line that's the far left of the grid, and then 5 being the column line that's the far right of the grid. And then we're saying go from line 1 to line 3. So that will only leave one column left in the grid. So that will only leave 2 more columns left in the grid for the other 2 cards to go in. And that's between lines 3 to 4 and lines 4 to 5. But this one takes up the most amount of width. The card images need to be resized proportionally, or in other words, retain the aspect ratio. To do this, we don't set height on the actual image container. Instead, we set a padding bottom that is a percentage. This current value will derive its quantity from the width of the container, and the current percentage we are using will lead to a 16:9 ratio, which is perfect for images. The image itself is set to absolute, so that it will fill the entire dimensions of the image container that it is inside of, as you can see. And because this resizes proportionally based on 16:9 ratio, the image will also resize itself based on that same ratio. The text will be highlighted when we hover over the associated card, and the text decoration thickness property, if you're wondering what this is, it's essentially a new experimental property that increases the thickness of a text underline. You have to be careful though when you use it, because not all browsers support it yet. As for the other 2 subsidiary cards, we'll use the same principles covered earlier to style them accordingly. And when we get to this width, we'll decrease some of the font size to make things look more responsive and good. At this stage, we'll have the main headliner take up most of the space on the left, and the 2 subsidiary cards stacked vertically on the right. As you can see, we created a new media query, and essentially we're changing the grid so that the main headliner takes up most of the space on the left, and the 2 subsidiary cards are stacked vertically on the right. The smallest position will be the main headliner and the two subsidiary cards vertically, and the smallest we will set it so that the main headliner and the two subsidiary cards are stacked vertically with the two subsidiary cards placed side by side to each other. So we'll demonstrate this now. As you can see, that's this one where they are stacked vertically here, but this one's quite large still. And then going all the way to here, as you can see, this is one where they stack vertically, but these are side by side. And as you can see, this is all looking good. It's all looking responsive. And this is the finished product. And obviously you could open this as well, and this is all working fine. I mean, look at that. It's just beautiful to even look at it. In my opinion, anyway, it looks so good. I don't want to blow my own trumpet too much, but I think that that's pretty good. And I think that's all we have time for in this video. And I know that we covered a lot of ground in this video, so please do message me if you need any clarifications or have any questions. I would love to hear back from you guys. Likewise, you'd be doing me a huge favour if you considered liking and subscribing. This would mean a great deal to me, especially if you did benefit from one of my videos. But anyhow, enough about me. I hope that you enjoyed this video and learned something useful from it. All in all, have a great day and peace out.